Morning, Kishan.
Morning, Lars.
So today we're going to take a look at how Openclaw could be of use in enterprise environments, or maybe be not of use. VentureBeat had an article. It's not like a last week article, but it's a recent article about the enterprise adoption, or at least what could it mean for enterprises. They have some takeaways. I think, not 100% sure, but I think part of the text is also generated by AI. We are aware of that. But what is interesting is that it has some of the I think it says some things that we wouldn't say about Openclaw. We're going to take a look at the Openclaw interface in a sec, also the entity that we have been running the last couple of weeks at Eli5. In the sense of, from a general take, what do you think about the article of VentureBeat, Kishan?
I think it's very optimistic, some of the takes that they are written down in the article. Openclaw is a hobby project. The creator even said it himself. It's something he created for himself and just put it out in the open. It's not secure. It's not tested to be secure. It's not known what the output is of certain things, what it would do. It doesn't have its own mind, but the whole idea of being given all the access to everything on your device and doing whatever it needs to do with it to reach a goal doesn't necessarily mean that it takes the proper path to reach that goal. It can take shortcuts. We've seen in LLM implementations that LLMs like to take shortcuts because it's the most simple way of doing things. They don't necessarily do it the proper way or the secure way. And some of the things that are said here in that, hey, the coded outputs is buggy and glitchy, but it works. I don't really think that resonates with what enterprises, or at least not even enterprises, just any company that writes software needs to be putting out there. Because eventually you need to maintain everything that you put out as well.
And I think also we talked about the shadow IT, which is certainly something that the CTOs, CIOs need to be aware of. And I think they're aware of all these things that are being built. But this article also says something about, in the lines of, executives are actually observing this trend in real time as employees deploy Openclaw on work machines without authorization, which I could imagine that they do. But I think if they are somewhat security minded, I'm pretty sure do you think there's one serious organization that has an Openclaw installed in the enterprise environment?
No. If you're serious about security and serious about taking these things and implementing these things properly, no, you wouldn't.
Right. So from a security perspective, I think this is the thing that you talked about in like a sec ago. It's 100% vibe coded. It's glitchy, not perfect, but it works. So what is that for quote? I think I'm not sure who they interviewed for this article.
I am not either, but even while we are not a big company, we do projects for governments, for local governments, for international organizations. We would never do this. Every piece of code that we put out is being checked by our senior developers to make sure that it is adhering to a certain standard that we want to put out, and also a certain security mindset, code that's secure by design. AI might do that if you give it the proper input, but if you just bite your way through it, it won't do that.
I think from a perspective of being useful for organizations, I think what I highlighted here, the enterprise sandbox environment could be of use if you have an entity installed that is not connected per se to your core systems, but has features, has functionality of it, or is of use outside of your regular organization, such as the thing that we are going to show in a sec about the news scraper, the article looking for relevant articles for our interviews. I think this sandbox, what do you think about the sandboxing environment, or the sandboxing of Openclaw for enterprises? Is that something that could work? Or
yeah, for experimentation, yes, boxing will work. That's also what we do. We sandbox the hell out of our Openclaw instance. It doesn't have any access that I don't want it to have. It's not connected to any production system that we use. But then again, that kind of hampers the ability of doing things autonomously, because the whole idea behind the whole Openclaw movement, as it were, is that it can do anything you can do, and it makes its own decisions. But if you sandbox everything and give it the guardrails, it's basically the same as writing a script that communicates to an LLM, only a little bit more convenient because you can access it from anywhere. That's the main difference.
So actually, what prohibits Openclaw from being really useful is to connect it to systems and give it context, but that would give you such an attack vector
Yes.
on your, and I think maybe Paperclip tries to look at it in another way. They built a new company ground up with 100% AI agents with a human, where the human could be in the loop. But For the enterprise environment, it seems almost unlikely that this is going to be a path. I say unlikely, but you never know, of course. But how would we see a way in the future, like a way forward being, what do you think about it 1, 2, 3 years from now? Where would Openclaw or a similar Openclaw would be of use in an enterprise environment? How would that look?
The whole thing around enterprises or bigger companies or SME, basically just any company that needs to be sure about their output, is they need some type of governance and control. And that is something you inherently don't have with these LLM implementations, because the output is not deterministic. You can put in a certain input 100 times and you will probably get different outputs every time if you adjust the parameters to be creative. Because if you don't do that, you might as well just build a script that does exactly what you want it to do, because that's deterministic. The whole idea behind an LLM or AI implementation is that it does things in a creative. It does things in a different way every time. And it tries to be coming up with solutions that you don't necessarily feed it. That kind of defeats the purpose for an enterprise, because you want the output to be deterministic. You want the output to be exactly what you expect it to be. If that isn't the case, you also don't know what you're putting out there. So you also don't know what attack vectors you expose. You also don't know what data is exposed. You also don't know what you would need to maintain along the line later on. The whole idea around controlling your output and controlling what you put out there needs to change if you want to be able to work this way. So the whole thing around AI agents and the implementing and writing things with AI agents is that you would have to trust that they do things a certain way that you are happy with putting out there. Else you would still have to check everything, and that is a job on itself.
Yeah, indeed. So like, being an auditor for the agents is
Exactly.
more than a full-time job. And I think it's not a nice job also. Probably it's not that, you talked about that in a previous article review, but in a sense, the technology I think we discussed this week also in the office, the technology and the tools that come out are it goes so fast that you probably also, for this challenge, there will be multiple solutions to deploy the agents in the enterprise environment. But for now, I think it's best to wait to integrate it at least into the enterprise environment. Well, and the article is, I think we can consider this as a first really bad article that we reviewed.
Yeah, it's the first where the takes that there are written down there is completely against what we would advise to do. Yes.
Looking at Openclaw as like how we used it the past weeks, maybe we can do a quick demo or walkthrough of the system, and that you show some of the features or the capabilities. And then I think the interesting part also for us or to show is the application that it has. So it scrapes sources. It looks for interesting articles concerning software modernization or AI and LLM implementations in enterprise environments. Can you show a bit about of the implementation of Openclaw?
Of course. So our Openclaw instance is completely sandboxed. It's completely outside of our normal infrastructure. So it's for us to play around with. So here you see the dashboard of our Openclaw instance, where we have the basic statistics of what we are running. The thing about Openclaw is that what makes it so interesting is that it has these different communication channels that are very low level access for a normal person to communicate with your instance. You don't need to go to a website. You just need to link it to one of your chat applications that you normally use. So we linked it to Telegram and to Slack. And we also limited everything it can do. So it's only allowed to talk to certain whitelisted users, but also only allowed to post things to a specific Slack channel, so nobody else can feed it additional data. That's one of these guardrails you have to put in, especially if it's an organization like us where we handle a lot of sensitive data also through chat. We don't want our Openclaw instance reading every other chat that if we just gave it a key that can access anything. So our keys that we shared with this instance are very scoped. But this makes it very easy to access, right? Our interface of communicating is basically just our phone, where we have Slack and Telegram, and we can chat with the instance itself. So the instance here is an overview of what kind of service we have running. We just have one at the moment. And here we can see the different sessions that are running, the different agents that are running or have run. We have a couple of Telegram interfaces for you and me, where we can interface with this Openclaw instance. And you can see here the agents for doing research have run a day ago and 19 minutes ago. So it will run again probably in 30 minutes, where we would get new information from the daily software modernization articles of the last day. And that's what we use it for. We also can see an overview of how many tokens and how many money we spent on it. So you can see the tokens per minute it uses, average tokens it uses per message. and what models we use to generate our different outputs, and also, what errors there were and what kind of tools were spawned. These were the cron jobs we were talking about, daily software modernization and AI research. You see the status of the different things. So this is nothing interesting, right? We can write this from scratch, but the thing about Openclaw is that we just have to tell it that we want certain information every day, every morning, and it will create its own cron jobs for us. So normally what we would do is go into a server and write a cron entry where we would call a certain script that does this research for us using an LLM. But right now we just had to write it in our Slack channel. Hey, create a daily job where you do deep research based on these different parameters and feed the information to us in a specific way in a specific channel. And that's what it does for us. And here you can see all the different skills. So we disabled a whole bunch of them because we don't need them. That's also one of the things you would need to do, is just not only enable what you want it to do, but it has a whole bunch of skills it can do. And there's a whole bunch of configuration, of course, you can do here, where you can basically customize anything about your own Openclaw instance to make it tailor-made to specifically what you want it to do.
So in a basic sense, it is quite easy to set up for maybe even non-technical people, but to configure it properly, also from a security point of view, I think mainly from a security point of view, it is quite some insight and details that you need to understand before it's secure and safe enough, right?
Yes, you need to know what you're doing. You need to know what an attack factor is, for example. You need to know what an API key is, what scopes are, what limitations you want to put on it. By default, you can give it all the access to do everything you want it to do, but it also makes the security vulnerabilities a lot more prone to happen. For example, what happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago is that there was a package that installed Openclaw by default because it was put somewhere in a prompt, in a GitHub issue title that it needs to happen, and every new instance would install Openclaw. So these prompt injection things of doing things automated. So if, for example, you would give it all access of your whole device, you would install it on your local device where you basically use it daily. And you would give it a job of mainly doing your calendar updates every day, or sending you what you would need to do for that day, or to-dos or whatever, and gave it a source that's maybe your email or your calendar. If a malicious actor would send you an email with a prompt injected into it, or send you a calendar invite that said, I don't know, to download a specific keylogger onto your device, and if your Openclaw instance would not have any guardrails against that, or you wouldn't have configured it that way, it would probably install it and run it. And the problem is you would never know, because these things happen without you knowing. It's autonomous. It just does whatever it needs to do to reach the output desired. So that's one of the things you don't control. The more access you give, the more opportunities for other people to infiltrate your instance or expose your instance you give it. So that's also what happened the last month, is that people just started searching the web for Openclaw instance ports and just started feeding it prompts if it wasn't secured. And they could basically just extract API keys from it and extract personal information from it because it wasn't secured.
With regards to the LLM usage, also obviously if your Openclaw instance is taken over by an adversary, but then the API keys are also visible to them. How did you make sure that with the implementation that the LLM, the token usage was minimal in the regular use of the Openclaw instance?
Yeah, what I did is we used Kimi, I think, Kimi K2 for the Openclaw instance, which is already a very cheap model. I just gave it for completely new account. I put, I think, 10 USD on it, and I didn't link my credit card to it. So basically, if somebody leaks, these keys are completely irrelevant to us, and the only thing you can use is the 10 USD that's on there, and that's it.
Prepaid LLM is actually the solution to a lot of problems.
Prepaid LLM, scoping your usage, and also telling a proper prompt that you wanted to use it a certain way, and scoping your agents to use a specific model in a specific way, and also limiting the token input and output. Because there are a lot of stories where people use hundreds of dollars in the first day of token usage just by giving it their normal API keys to Claude or to OpenAI, and not doing any limitation whatsoever. But it's also one of the issues that I see here. It's very easy to screw these things up if you don't know what you're doing. It's similar to when the whole cloud environments came up of Azure and AWS. It's very easy to spin up a bunch of machines and let it do whatever it needs to do, but it's also very easy to overrun your budget because it just keeps up spinning machines and you only know when you get the bill. So things
Indeed.
like setting up billing alerts is something you would need to know beforehand before you would actually do that.
The cost monitoring aspect of this whole LLM wave is very interesting also.
Yeah, it's similar to the cost monitoring aspect that happened with the whole cloud boom that happened before, when everything was just infrastructure as a service. It's very easy to set everything up. You just have to do a few clicks, but you also have to know how to monitor these things. Similar to what's happening right now. It's very easy to set up API keys. You can just do a few clicks, you link your credit card and be done with it. But to monitor these things is also very important, and to give it certain alerts, guardrails, and also to set up limits for it.
We've seen on LinkedIn several of these posts of people that have bills of tens of thousands of dollars or euros because someone took over their API keys
Exactly.
or they misconfigured the whole system. So it is a big risk for even people that do know what they're doing, I suppose, then, and look at the people that don't know what they're doing and they can install it easily. And then it is really about the configuration, as you said.
Yeah.
What I was wondering is, how do you look at the potential for Openclaw to support in software modernization projects as a whole, as a tool, but maybe obviously it uses multiple LLMs. It can be configured. It can have agents. It can do things, but we would not integrate that into an environment or into a production environment. How would you look at the use of Openclaw for software modernization projects?
I wouldn't advise using Openclaw for software modernization projects. I think this was really purpose-built as a sort of autonomous assistant. So you could probably use it to chat with and to maybe spitball some ideas around, or let it do some research on, hey, I'm thinking about implementing this or changing a certain part of an application or a landscape to something new, do some research on it and get a research report back later on while you're just on the go. You could just send it a voice message or a message and it would do it while you are doing different things. But giving it access to a code base and letting it do things autonomously, I would never advise that, no. Especially when you would need to give it so much context of what you would actually want to achieve. It's easier to just be in the loop. So things like, I don't know, output code or Claude code or Codex would be much more purpose-built for these things.
So it doesn't make sense to create agents within Openclaw that can do architecture reviews and that kind of stuff, because it's more in the tools that you just mentioned. It is far more purpose-built for doing exactly that instead of the Openclaw environment, which was maybe even more, we can consider that more as a hobby project even.
Yeah, exactly. And you would probably be able to do it once you fed it enough skills and information. But again, why would you make the effort when there are purpose-built tools for code reviews and coding actually as a whole out there? You will try, Openclaw is just made to be an assistant, not to be your do-it-all do-it-all person. Yep. It can, but it probably can do it well.
Great. Then thanks for the insights in our Openclaw instance. I think it will be in the near future interesting to also take a look at a paperclip, which I think takes things a bit more further even. Not so much probably for the existing enterprise or organizational environments, but more for new build organizations. But I think that is also interesting to take a look at, as with paperclip you can spin up a whole autonomous zero human organization. And I think that's interesting from a technology perspective, just to review that. But for now, I think the summary of this conversation was that the VentureBeat article was pretty bad, or at least had some pretty bad insights, if you ask us. And Openclaw is not very useful for software modernization projects, and can be quite dangerous when it comes to embedding that into an existing production system, a production environment.
Exactly. I think it's good to keep up to date with these things and keep looking at it and keep using it like we do as well, just to get a better understanding of what's out there and what to do and what not to do. We just know these things because we read and use a lot about them. But it is, as you said before, these things go very fast. Every day there's something new, or either a new thing that is put out there or something that was proven to be broken and somebody's built something new. For us, it's a very good way to keep track and keep up to date.
Also, really considering, or at least asking myself, who is making money in this whole AI LLM game? Like Claude and OpenAI. Yeah, probably, because Claude and OpenAI, or Anthropic and OpenAI, are losing a lot of money. They, at the same time, I think the data centers probably make money, the whole infrastructure, the energy suppliers. But also, if you look at the rate of new tools that are introduced, often also being open source even, and that's not really a making money game if you now introduce new tools to an audience, because also many of these tools that are introduced are built by engineers, and they just put it out there for their own use. They build that. Most of the time they build it for their own use, then put it out there. People are going to play with that. But there's not so much like a go-to-market, a marketing, a sales strategy around it, except for companies like Eli 5 that can do implementations like the automation and AI implementations within existing systems. But the tools itself and the products, I don't really see how they do make money. Do you see that? Or
It's like well, not always, but since the whole open source movement, it's you don't make money on the software anymore. You make money on implementing the software properly and advising people on how to use it. Everybody uses React. React doesn't make money, but you need to know how to use it properly or how to build something cool with it to make money with it. Similar to every server runs on Linux. Linux Foundation doesn't make, nobody pays the Linux Foundation. People pay, or enterprises pay for proper versions or locked down Linux environments or getting hardware that runs certain parts of their infrastructure using these open source tools. So it didn't really change much. The only thing is that software is a lot easier to build using an LLM, but also a lot easier to screw up.
yeah, I think it's a good summary of the conversation. Thanks, Kishan, for your time.
Thank you, first.